Hi, my name's Dan, and I'm going to be doing a photographer's review of the Samsung NX1. I've had this guy for a little over a month now. It is updated to the firmware 1.3, which is currently the latest version of the firmware. And it's a simply phenomenal camera. A little bit of background about myself. I am a professional wedding and portrait photographer. I do shoot a lot of landscapes and whatnot for fun as well, but the paid gigs are portraits and weddings. So that is what this review is more so geared towards, but if it's going to shoot and perform well under that type of scenario, it will be even better for a landscape photographers because you're not set up with the same kind of time restrictions and quick focusing that you are with an event. Sports shooters are going to love the 15 frames per second. That is an amazing feature and tested and works really well. The only downside for sports photographers is the lens lineup is not there for you quite yet. So you're basically limited to the 50-150 zoom, and that is basically like your 70-200 on the full frame, but nothing any bigger than that. So I don't anticipate very many sports shooters jumping onto this one, especially if they're used to a 400mm Nikon or Canon type lens. So in the time that I've had to play with this, when I first started shooting, I've been shooting events and weddings for 8 years, give or take. I started off with a Pentax system. That's how I learned when I was a kid, and I had a bunch of lenses, so I went with it. At the time, 8 years ago, when the first Pentax digital body came out, it wasn't really geared towards weddings, events, fast autofocus type scenarios. The sensors had to come a long ways, and it was sort of a crippled system for what I was trying to use it for. So I ended up switching over to Nikon, and I loved it. They were fabulous cameras. I have two D700s, I've had a 7000, a 7100, which is what this video is being shot on, and it is a great system overall. They've got everything that I need. Their autofocus is spectacular. I haven't had really any problems whatsoever. So it's been very hesitant for me to want to jump ship from this type of a system. But the main reason that I'm doing it is size, to be honest, and weight. So lugging one of these guys around all day, two of them to be honest, gets to be a little much on the neck and shoulders and back, and even the wrists and forearms. I've been doing this for a while. I like to think that I've got some pretty good camera posture, but at the end of the day, 8-10 hours, it starts to feel it in the wrists and the forearms and the neck and shoulders. So when you look at the size comparison of these two, this is a 17-35 f4 on the Nikon, and on the Samsung I've got a 10mm, but to compare with the 16, for example, it's a substantial difference. This is a 2.4 and that is an f4, and when you have them together, I mean, it's meaty, you can tell. So size-wise was the main reason that I kind of jumped ship from it, and also the shutter sound is starting to get a little noisy in quiet churches compared to this guy here. Not that it's a huge deal. I mean, I've been shooting with it for so long, but eventually you start to hear it yourself and it just starts to feel loud. But the main reason is size and weight. And I'm really excited to try this little guy. I used it for one wedding so far, and I had the Nikon on the other side just because I didn't want to fully commit one way or the other and then have something fail on me. But this was so nice, so small, I barely even felt it in comparison to the monster over here. But when I compare the two, obviously I'm working from a Nikon system over to the Samsung system, and if you're going from Canon or Pentax or Fuji or whatever, you're going to be used to a certain layout of buttons, and that's what most people's main complaint is that the buttons are different. Well, obviously they're different because it's a different system. It doesn't take you very long to become accustomed with where everything is on this little guy, and there are a lot of customizable options on here. So if you're missing something, odds are you can key map it and make sure it is there. Only one, maybe two things that I missed from the Nikon over to this one was when I format a card. You stick a card in and press the two buttons on the Nikon, it formats it. This one doesn't have that. You have to dig into the menu to do that. Not a big deal if you prepare your cards ahead of time, which I never did, so I was just very used to being able to do that. And maybe the flash, changing the flash from second curtain, first curtain, regular flash, you have to go into the menus a little further than just holding the button and moving the dial on this guy. So that is really the only two differences that I encountered in the one wedding that I shot with it. So like I've said, I've had this guy for about a month, and I've done a little bit of work with it. I did one wedding with it so far, and I shot some hockey games and track and field events that my kids are doing, just to get sort of accustomed to how things worked and where the buttons were, and if it was going to be the right fit for me to try to incorporate into a wedding. And on the action side of things, the limited use that I've had with it, it has been perfect. No issues whatsoever. The 15 frames per second is just ridiculous. The buffer is right there. There's no lag. I don't have any issues at all. I'm sure if you hold it down for a certain length of time, which I never really wanted to care to, because I don't want to thumb through 1,000 pictures. So I didn't do that, but eventually the buffer's going to catch up to you. When, I'm not sure. The autofocus was great. I mean, we're talking about having someone running at me for a long jump and taking continuous frames as they jump, and it focuses on every frame and captures them. Shooting with the hockey inside the arena, no issues whatsoever. I played with a little bit of the film coverage, the video coverage, but no issues at all, and I didn't really dive into that aspect. There's been a lot of reviews on the video, so go somewhere else for that until I jump into the video review. When you pick it up, it feels great. It holds in your hand perfectly. I don't have any issues with it being too big, too small, too cumbersome, bumping into something, buttons in the wrong place. I like the way everything's laid out. I was used to the forward button up here for the Nikons. It's just on top now. Like I said, it's just adjusting to where one was on one system and on the other. It's not that it's not there anymore, it's just in a different spot. The dial up here is a click, move around, click in again, so it's not going to move on you by accident. The one on this side could, though, which might be a little bit of a problem for some. I didn't experience that, but it is in the right spot where it would just potentially turn. There is a bit of a click to it, but it's not going to be hard to move that button. It adjusts the drive, so it goes from single to high speed and then over to bracket, so it's not going to be a huge deal. You're not changing something big time. And on the top you've got your ISO, autofocus, metering, and white balance. If you bump one of those buttons, it comes up on the screen to adjust it, so that's possible, but not very likely.